Hello to anyone who's listening to this and is still interested in a critical analysis show of House MD 6 years after the fact. This is Differential Diagnosis, which is, as I just said, a critical analysis of every episode of House. My name's Harvey. I'll be hosting, and along with me hosting is my friend Gareth.
Hello.
Who I will be calling Gaz.
Yep.
Because that's his name, and I don't know why I called him Gareth.
Well, I don't know either, so, it's very interesting. I think it reveals something very psychologically,
I'm playing up for the microphone.
Really?
But in general, we realised that 6 years after, House ended, which I recently just found out, is quite a long time to do an episode-by-episode analysis of a show. I know that, people... I've seen...
You've been on Reddit. You saw some people were really upset that there weren't any House criticism podcasts. And, well, you've come up with an idea, a crazy idea, to bring it out into the interwebs.
But the even though it's 6 years after the fact, mostly the reason for this was my friend Gaz has he sort of caught the show in the original run, but he never finished it, and he started watching it again recently. And I've seen the show through multiple times and just thought, why don't we watch it? And while we're watching it, why don't we analyse the show? Because I think Gaz would agree that for a network show, and hopefully Gaz will agree with this, is I actually think House is a pretty, it's a very original show. I think it definitely focuses on darker tones and has pretty good character development for the type of show it could be, compared to most medical procedurals. I think it could have been a lot more generic than it was.
And it was definitely operating within the confines of network television on Universal as well. And obviously you can see in the politics that occurs in the writing of season one, especially in the pilot, where it is so saccharine sweet at the end, that you could definitely see there was some struggling there to get the right tone for House and somehow also please the studio executives. So in that respect, it manages to juggle the tightrope of giving something quite interesting and then has some sort of, no pun intended, art house sensibilities.
Art house MD. But those are the kind of things we're sort of going to go into as we look into it, because I think you and I noticed in the pilot episode that it does have a very generic feel to it, that it kind of feels like they sort of slipped it under the radar. And in a way, that's why House is relatively impressive. It is a sort of, people often talk about House like it's quite formulaic, which it certainly is. Every episode of House follows a very distinct formula. But the interesting thing about that is that within that, it's actually got quite a lot of good character development and quite horrific moments going on. I think it explores a lot of quite dark themes quite well. Even though most people who watch the show casually would be like, oh, the House formula is pretty basic. It's House, see something interesting, makes a guess, it isn't right, makes a guess, nothing right. He goes and talks to Wilson or jerks off for 5 minutes, and then his jizz lands on the floor and makes the shape of a heart, and he's like, oh my god, the person actually has a cardiac tumor. I think that's what people currently know as House, but we thought, hey, as fans, we'd walk through it, we'd watch it, and we'd do some analysis on those kind of things that people maybe don't talk about.
Yeah, for the sake of clarity, and given Harvey's diagnosis of cardiac tumor, we are not practicing medical professionals, so any of our kind of theories or madcap understandings or conceptions of physiology are not to be taken with any remote sense of seriousness. Also, point of order, I did not use art house seriously. That was an attempt at a shit pun. And please let me, any film buffs or whatever, leave me alone. Don't criticize me for that.
Yeah.
And let's just focus on the House.
Yeah, well, I think the lack of medical knowledge is an important point, because I don't believe you're a doctor.
No.
Gaz. Neither am I, surprisingly. I'm just a bloke who, I like a show and I think I can frame a thought. And that's pretty much what you need, I think, to talk about a show.
That's a really low bar for criticism.
It's the lowest bar, but I'm happy to wield it.
Oh, fantastic. As am I.
So I think with the episodes, like, this obviously isn't an essay. This isn't something that we've scripted, as you might have noticed. So I think probably the structure of each episode is we've pretty much got the episode on in the background. Obviously, you won't hear it because that would sound terrible. But I think what we'll do is we'll just walk through the episodes, sort of talk about our thoughts on each one. I think, like, casual viewers, we're pretty much going to ignore the medicine. I think, like, I don't really think the medicine's always been like a backbone of the show, but it's not, like, most people don't watch House like really understanding the medicine. Maybe I don't, but I think it's more, as I say, I think it's a character study hidden underneath a medical procedural, and I don't think the medicine is actually particularly important unless it's like thematically tied to the episode, which it often is. Yeah. And so I think what we'll be doing is watching the show in that way. You know, we'll be talking about scenes as they go. We'll edit it down, obviously, and I think as I say, this is the first episode. Like, we've selected the first 3 episodes to look at. But, you know, it depends how many episodes we get through. Maybe we'll just talk about the first episode for an hour. But I think that if we sort of touch on multiple episodes, we'll sort of, like, it gives us an ability to check out arcs. But for the first episode, we'll definitely be checking out the pilot compared to the, like, start of the series, because I think, like, the differences between the pilot episode and the rest of the series are quite noticeable. And yeah, we'll go from there. So
Episode 1. Pilot, aka Everybody Lies. Directed by Bryan Singer, noted filmmaker and television director, obviously.
And suspected paedophile. But let's not talk about that aspect of his career.
I did, like, take a sharp intake of breath when I saw in your eyes that you were going to say something about that. I'm thinking I was going to get sued by Bryan Singer.
No.
For claiming he is something which is only suspected.
I said suspected. It's not libel if it's suspected. But, well, the pilot episode, famously, you know, I like to call it the orange episode because it's orange for some reason. I don't know why it's orange. It's either just the production company just asked for it to be in orange to show that it was the pilot episode and different to the rest of the episodes, or it's like a jaundice thing.
You think they're bleeding in some sort of diseases into the cinematography right from the off? And jaundice is like, that's the one.
I honestly, like, the show's starting out, no one really knows what it is. I think that's, it wasn't like House is perfectly conceived and it's like, oh, it's a perfect show. I think every pilot is a bit dodgy. So I think House is a good, like, I can perfectly see that somebody might have thought that was a good idea while filming it.
Also, I mean, it's the orange and teal thing. I mean, that's a good trope of cinematography, using that kind of colour scheme. But also it might be just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, you know, bring in some more, less natural light and make everyone look like exalted orange angels, you know, or mannequins designed or made up in ode to the future president of the United States. But, you know, I just don't know these days what Bryan Singer was thinking.
No.
We'd have to ask him.
So I say, to talk more about the episode, it's a pretty solid, simple case. It's starts off with a primary school teacher. She goes into school. She has a stroke. I think it's a stroke.
No, it's aphasia.
She has aphasia.
She's just garbling nonsense like we are in this podcast. And, so I think it's a really good case to begin with.
Are you going to write "Call the nurse" on the side of the wall and I'll have to read it out because I can't read? Call the nurse. Oh, no. But, pretty simple. She collapses. They take her in. I think it's a little bit more complex than that.
at the beginning, she's walking through the corridor. She's talking to a colleague. There, she's talking or alluding to in a kind of euphemistic terms that she didn't go out last night and didn't meet someone last night, and kind of flat out kind of lies to a colleague, and while saying I wouldn't lie to you. And
I mean, it does do the whole like what people's, you know, when you're a kid, and then you get older, you notice that the teachers definitely had private lives, and it's that transition where she, you know, is talking about not banging this guy. And then, like, she walks in and she's like, "Hi, kids," like all that stuff. So I think that's like that's a pretty like strong opening. When I said generic, I just meant like, you know, there are a lot of like more ridiculous house openings, which come in later, and I think this one's like a nice, simple one.
But I think it establishes the theme because she lies to a colleague, basically, or kind of plausible deniability. You know, doesn't deny that it happened, not plausible deniability, but denies that it, or doesn't kind of deny, she just doesn't say anything. It's like a lie of omission.
Yeah.
And she goes into the classroom and she kind of in euphemistic terms actually explains the truth to these children. And that to me is a really interesting moment because if anything, it's called Everybody Lies, the episode. House is preoccupied with lies. He's preoccupied with the truth, most importantly, and you can prove things by finding out the lies. You can then obviously infer the truth.
Well, the truth starts in lies.
Exactly.
Being his popular philosophical statement at the start.
Yeah, to Foreman, who is arguably his protege. I think that starts the arc between Foreman and House and the tension between them as Foreman tries to come to terms with the fact that he's like House in a lot of ways. Yeah.
But there's I mean, let's go into the character slightly. The actual start of the show is just, I think the way the characters are introduced is pretty, I would say for a pilot, understandable. And I think when we look into the second episode, I feel like the second episode reboots the series as it probably should, because the pilot might not be aired. It was in the end, I believe. Yeah. But yeah, the characters are definitely introduced in what could be described as a clumsy way. I think, like, Wilson starts off being like, I really care for this patient. And, you know, he's lying, which fits the theme again. They're not subtle about that, as you say. But, you know, Wilson introduced saying, oh, I care about this person. House is like, well, I'm a cynical man. I don't believe anything you say. And then throughout the episode, like, then it starts off saying that, you know, he doesn't have any cases. He doesn't like people. Then it introduces the team. And throughout the show, we literally, like, House literally just says out loud what all the team's character traits are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you know, Foreman is, he's a kid. He's from the ghetto. Yeah. I don't know if he's from the ghetto. He's from a lower class area, and he's worked his way up. He's very driven, which, like, you know, you say could, like, leads into that he wants to be great, like House. I think Chase is a bit of a weird one in this episode. I think that Chase later, like, there's a ongoing thing where Chase clearly likes House and idolizes House and wants to be like House. And he, like, makes actions like House. So I would say that Chase is more the protege of House. But Foreman definitely has, like, the drive to be like House. It's a bit, like, they sort of do it in subtle ways. I think Chase, like, likes House's attitude, whereas Foreman respects, like, House's, like, ability to be right.
Yeah. Maybe refine the point a little bit and say, you know, Chase wants House to be his dad, in a way, a father figure, to guide him and to be something to emulate. Foreman, I think the relationship between House and Foreman is more like it's a little bit competitive. They're always arguing and bitching and fighting with each other over the truth. And it's more like apprentice and master rather than father and son.
Yeah, and which the father theme, I mean, it's brought up in here that it's actually brought up that Chase's dad made a call. Yeah. Which Chase is later suggested to be having a very strange relationship with his dad. So I'm not sure if that was rewritten. Yeah. Or his dad's just like, you know, I'm just going to call up and get me sent a job with House MD, the best bleeding diagnostician in the world. But And then Cameron's a very weird character. I think like Cameron's it turns out was picked because she was pretty.
Yeah.
And that ties into her later thing that she tries really hard. Like she's clearly a very caring person, but she's also extremely driven because she doesn't want to be defined by that idea. But yeah, I think in certainly sometimes Cameron is the laziest written. Like if anyone's going to be really irrational and make bad decisions, it's usually Cameron, which I think is a bit of a shame because Cameron's got a pretty solid foundation. But I think with all the characters in the pilot, maybe this is me talking just out of my arse.
Yeah.
But I know that the original, because there's a lot of Sherlock Holmes imagery in the first episode. Like the patient is called Adler.
Yeah.
Like the lady that
From Scandal in Scarlet, isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah.
And then there's
That's correct.
and then there's House, which is a singular of Holmes. Get it? And then there's Wilson, who's Watson.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a strange one because I think the original idea was that the team was sort of going to be like Watson, the archetype of Watson, like listening and documenting what Holmes says. And then I guess Wilson was kind of like that again. There seemed to be two Wilsons or two Watsons within this like idea. I think it got a bit jumbled, but yeah, the interesting thing about it is that I find the team, especially in the first episodes, which makes sense because they're resident doctors. Like they don't really. I kind of like how they do very slowly become more involved and more active, and they actually come up with decisions. But the first few episodes, like the team are quite like subdued. They're quite passive in the same way that Watson just sort of listens to House and at Holmes, and then like carries out his like his deductions. The team in this they are extremely passive. I don't know if you noticed that. I just find that like Cameron, Foreman, and Chase don't really make any decisions. They kind of just listen to House and they go, okay, let's do that. Like a lot of the first episodes are sort of, especially the pilot, which we're talking about now, is like, Chase and Cameron and Foreman are sort of just carrying out things.
Yeah. Little point. We talked about the reasons House hide them. That doesn't get discussed until later on.
It doesn't, no. Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just going to be like the ref. I'm just going to give you a yellow card. Don't do it again or you're out. Or off. But then again, the analogy with Sherlock Holmes, surely the three trainee physicians are more like in the Sherlock Holmes analogy, like the Baker Street Irregulars, his little gang of street urchins that go out and get intelligence.
Yeah. About
a crime or a case that Sherlock Holmes uses. Wilson is Watson, or was intended to be in that analogy. Yeah. And obviously Holmes. I don't know how Cuddy works into it. I don't know. I can't remember much about the Sherlock Holmes.
I think Cuddy is just like. I mean, the problem with like sort of Sherlock Holmes doesn't have a master, which within the realm of like freelance detective. Is fine. Well, there is that detective who he works with in Sherlock Holmes, so I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
But I think within the realms of being a freelance detective, you can sort of do whatever you want. But because, like, House isn't a grounded medical show, I don't know a lot about I don't know a lot about American medicine or medicine in general, but I do know that most of the stuff that House does, you cannot do. So it's not the most realistic show. So I think Cuddy is just there to literally be a sort of, like, authority figure just to stop him being absolutely insane to the point where you'd be like, this makes no sense.
But he does that constantly with Cuddy. That's the thing. He does like broach it. He will push the boundaries as far as they can go to see if Cuddy's going to, not just to see if Cuddy would snap, but also obviously for ethical reasons, he does push those boundaries pretty hard. Interestingly, in the first episode, my favourite part of it, and probably the bit that got me hooked, was that opening shot where you see a person in a white coat and another person with a cane. You think, so House is a lab coat wearing physician. Obviously, it's him. Yeah. Obviously, the camera swivels up and you see Wilson say, hey, that's not Hugh Laurie. I thought he was the star of the show. And he's nothing like the conventional Doctor we want.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the broader theme of the pilot, and I think most of the first season, or at least the early part of the first season, is that it churns out every single trope of a medical procedural, every single one, like mechanically, and then turns them on their head and uses it, and it asks us to accept all these tropes, even though we think they're intuitively not true when they apply in the kind of House universe.
Yeah.
We think, House is just a genius diagnostician, but actually who solves all these cases that are very stereotypical, but actually he's not as straight as he seems. And I think in the pilot he does come across as very straight. You don't really see the druggy elements yet, or the kind of psychoses, and people, it seems like they're, especially like the allusions in the later episodes to him being associated with hookers and stuff like that.
But I think at that point he's joking.
Yeah,
there is definitely, as you say, it's because there is literally a first time he gets a hooker in the second series. Yeah, which is obviously to be discussed then. But yeah, I think as you say, the idea is that I think that David Shaw and the other writers obviously wanted a much more. Well, they wanted it to be a character study of quite broken people. And I think that they, as you say, they do it in a way where they play with the tropes of the medical procedural, not only to interest the audience, but I think it is just a very simple way to have got it made. Like House is really well played by Hugh Laurie. I think that they probably thought that House, the character, would take the actual show into being run, because he's a good lead. But after that, I think they had a larger plan of how they were going to slowly do that thing where they reveal, obviously, he's quite a restrained man. He's obviously got a leg problem. He's got a bit of a drug problem, but he's a genius. He gets the job done. He's a bit broken, but he's fine. And then, like, in later episodes, you actually start to see that, actually, maybe this man is deeply unhappy, and is like, maybe the medication isn't such a good idea, and actually, maybe it's really actually depressing his situation. So yeah, I think that House, the whole tipping procedural tropes on their heads in the way they do, and especially
subverting the expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Which the pilot doesn't. It sort of plays with it, but it doesn't completely do. Because I always find, I've seen other people talk about this, but House in the first episode is actually like he's a bit sarcastic.
Yeah.
But overall, he's quite like a supportive mentor. Like, he sort of clearly respects the team when they come to him. He talks to them. He actually at one point, he does a test, sort of, and lies them to, like, he sort of gets them coming up with ideas. But it's very much it's very restrained. It's not in the sort of weird House way later on in the later series where he's just being, completely conniving and insane.
I don't know. Like in the first conversation he has with Wilson, Wilson says, "You've got 3 overqualified doctors working for you, getting bored." And then it feels like he's just been obligated to put them into action on this case.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a very strange power dynamic, that you can just furlough like a bunch of highly trained physicians.
Yeah, but it's because House doesn't want. House is. It's suggested that he's worked at the hospital for 5 years at this point.
Yeah. And
it kind of sounds like he hasn't done any work for those 5 years, and he's just now been forced to get a team. Like, it's quite a weird setup. Like, I don't think we ever go into the context of the previous 5 years, but it's also like he keeps talking about how he's being forced to do clinic duty now, and he's got like 5 years of clinic duty to catch up with.
And 5 or 6?
I might have been 6. But it's Cuddy is suddenly very forceful, very extremely forceful to get him doing clinic hours, and it's like, what, you're just doing it now after 6 years, and he's just got a team. It's sort of like the House before House is sort of a very lazy man. It's almost like this case just kicks him into action, then he just starts doing cases. Like, it's almost like he's done nothing for 5 years before. I don't know if it's like written weirdly, or it's sort of like...
It didn't really get sewn up. I don't think that's one of the weaknesses of the pilot, I think, is and one of its strengths, obviously, to keep you enticed, is that there are all these weird kind of consequences, like the one where it seems like he's employed 3 highly skilled, highly talented physicians who are really good in their field, gone to do nothing on a fellowship that's supposed to be one of the toughest to get. Like, who would go for that job if all they would do is work for nothing, and all they think about in their lives is doing, working in the medical profession? They have nothing else, because one of the things you get out the first season, at least, is these people don't have any lives.
They're all very like, there's Foreman is clearly like working his way out of a class system. Cameron's trying to prove herself. Chase just sort of seems to just like medicine and is quite hardworking. I think he's trying to emulate his father. That's a big thing about Chase, isn't it? Which then we were talking about, he might be also trying to emulate House within that father.
We're skipping ahead, obviously. But...
We are. But yeah, so yeah, they're extremely determined people, which, as you say, like, House just like had them sit around.
One of my favourite parts of the episode also is the dialogues between Cuddy and House, which I found really interesting. Like, in the elevator, I think, in the elevator scene, if I'm correct. Yeah. Please be correct. There's a lot of crosstalk. It's kind of like MASH, that kind of Altman-esque kind of cross-talking each other, and it just feels like really well acted.
Well, that was the audition that got Hugh Laurie that sequence.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I didn't plan on being in your office 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think I think it was in the elevator, I think, the one where they were cross-talking.
Yeah, like Cuddy's talking over House, like I'm doing to you right now.
Yes. And the other way, and you could definitely see that the two actors had like a rapport and kind of chemistry, and I think that's fantastic. I thought that was like a high point in it, because it really sets up the kind of boss, employee relationship that they have, and the obvious tensions with it, because Cuddy respects House so much, because obviously she sees the value in him as a diagnostician, and his reputation obviously is a boon to the hospital. So, and that operates on a number of levels. So, like, you've got that kind of reputational level, which is it helps the hospital. And then you've got this thing, I think, that you see just a little bit in the pilot, which is this respect for House as a kind of physician, which gets explored, in other episodes. And then obviously there's the personal relationship beyond those kind of professional bounds, which, is the big long game of the series. Yeah. So that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing, is how that blossoms from now till then.
Absolutely. Well, I think Cuddy's actually an interesting... I think Cuddy's a great character for that reason, that she's sort of like... She's that traditional, like, the police chief, one who's like, you do things by the book, House. But she's like, there's clearly a nice back and forth about it. As you say, it's cordial, and like they've obviously had a history. And I think one of the things I really like about this show is that people smile and laugh at what people say. Like when House makes a joke, for the start, it's actually usually Chase, I've noticed, who's smiling at him, and that is brought up in a later episode. That Chase is like kissing House's ass because he obviously, really idolizes him. But yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, is it's actually quite naturalistic. Like in a lot of procedurals like this and shows like this, like you do not have people laughing at each other, and as you say, like them talking over each other and laughing actually makes it feel like then it's quite naturalistic. It's like they're people. It's which I don't know if you've noticed, I just don't see that in a lot of like really overly produced shows.
It always helps that if you've got some good acting chops there to do it. I mean, Hugh Laurie obviously is indisputed, and I think he just kickstarts everybody's engines to kind of react in this kind of naturalistic, quite clever dialogue that's been written. Maybe I'm fanboying a little bit over Hugh Laurie in this, because obviously the other cast members in this ensemble are obviously really, really good too. Yeah. I do like Omar Epps is fantastic.
He's great
throughout the whole series, but in this episode it's pretty good. Like I said, the master-apprentice relationship comes up where they're talking about the food in the canteen.
They are, which is a scene that just popped up, and I have to say, probably the most, personally, my most cringy scene in House. I think House, like, so this is what I was talking about when I meant the, like, sort of House telling everyone why he picked them. It's to give them character and to like talk about their backgrounds and make House seem like he's so calculating. Like these people aren't just the best; they're best for House's means. And I think Foreman's being like, I need a guy with street smarts. And there's something really painful about that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I find it also weird, like, because House is like, I talked to your your PE teacher about like your criminal record. It's like, but he didn't know he had a criminal record. So did he just talk to everyone's gym teachers to see if they had a criminal record? And then like it's just sort of like, I just find it a really like I think the others are more subtle, but Foreman's reason for being picked is very like, clearly they wanted to set up a character of someone who from working class and like has worked their way up, and it's done in a really heavy-handed way. It's also got that horrible shot where Foreman puts the sandwich in his mouth, clearly like showing like, oh well, you think the sandwich is inedible because for context, for anyone who doesn't remember this very specific part of the episode, Foreman's eating a sandwich. House is like, don't eat that because the woman in the kitchen is ill. And then Foreman finishes it and eats it, showing him that, like, I don't care about your deductions. I do things my own way. And it's like a really horrible camera shot that sort of like follows him as he stares point blank in the camera and puts a sandwich in his mouth. And it's the most like cringy, like, oh, it's so packed with symbolism. And it's like, I need a guy with street smarts. I just think it's such a painful scene.
How many takes did that take? Him just staring into a camera, eating a sandwich really meaningfully? Yeah.
Maybe
with a lot of spite towards House to say, fuck you, I don't believe in your deductions, as you say.
Maybe it's spite towards Bryan Singer, who's sort of like masturbating behind the camera.
Oh, for fuck's sake, don't let...
No, hey, suspected.
But then again, I think the reasons that are supposedly given for why they're hired, maybe that's House lying. He could easily lie about that. Why? Well, to his own ends, because then they feel like they're pliable to his theories and deductions. I'm here because of this.
But he's done the research.
Yeah.
He didn't just take a guess at Foreman having a criminal record. Like, he did it.
He's a very insanely thorough man. I mean, he will go through an entire pharmacy to find out the right pill. Spoiler alert.
You're jumping ahead.
So, given that, I don't put it past him that he's lying. He's just using it to like, see if their egos are in check or not.
No, absolutely. Just for a catch up of what the episode actually, I mean, in the episode, I know you sort of disagree, but I think it's a really simple case. It's because I think at this point, like, she literally just gets sicker and sicker, and the team, based on the evidence of what's wrong with her, deduce what might be the case. But it's not really the team, it's House who's deducing it, and the team then carry out the tests.
Yeah.
I think that's, that sort of sets up the power dynamic between House and the team, and how they're quite naive and they're like sort of, listening to everything House says. But we're not talking about the case a lot, and it is literally just Adler collapse in a classroom. She gets sick. She gets sicker. House diagnoses maggots in the head, which leads up to a very nice scene where House has a conversation with her about life and death. And I think that sort of, that's just a scene that shows that House arguably cares or just wants the patient to not be an idiot. But it definitely, I think that's actually a subtle way that they kind of bring out the fact that he's a atheist. Like, she's sort of talking about how, like, dignified and how she's going to go to a better place, and House is like, no, it's not dignified. This is all there is. Shut up. And I think that's like a way that maybe they do it uncontroversially on network television, because House is actually quite standout in the fact that he's an atheist character as well, which you don't get very often in an American network TV show, especially at the time. Like, when was this made? Like 2004?
Especially a protagonist in a
Yeah,
leading
exactly.
role.
Yeah, like if it was like some wacky side character, and they're like, "Oh, you and your crazy views," but he's not. He's the protagonist, as you say, and it's like, as you say, he's like in that opening shot with the nice coat and the fucking annoyed man with a walking stick. Like, you don't expect your protagonist to be like that, and for the time, House was relatively interesting in that sense.
Yeah, I think, well, the case is quite simple, but I think the message and the themes that it establishes are quite complex. That's my point, is it uses that patient establishing shot, patient gets sick, gets admitted to hospital. They try and figure out a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
They try the diagnosis by effecting a treatment. The treatment doesn't seem to do anything. Things get worse. They go in the MRI machine. There's always a complication in the MRI machine because it's a big, massive science machine, and because it's full of mysterious objects and no one really understands except for some crazy scientists. Something crazy happens in the MRI machine.
Yeah.
Second complication, they treat her again. Epiphany trope. They find the treatment. They have to convince her of the treatment that is right, even though they've got it wrong several times.
Yeah.
Voila, she's cured once she's convinced. But how it goes about getting from those different bits, those A to B to C to D to E, that's the interesting bit. It's like the cartilage between the joints of the plot.
Yeah.
And it's really nice how they fill that out.
Oh, it's extremely well plotted. I wasn't. Yeah, no, that's fair. I think because I've seen so many episodes of House done extremely well, and the way that they sort of take medical jargon and turn it into a pretty understandable format for the audience to be like, I know what's wrong with the head.
But they do those like crazy 3D visualizations of like
you need to I think there's
like
4 of them.
Like Star Wars, where you're delving in and like Han Solo's going in the Millennium Falcon.
This episode definitely has the most of them.
Yeah.
Like, they had just leftover budget and they were like, what can we do? It's like, anytime anyone mentions anything about the inside of the body, I want CGI, which has aged horribly. Let's be honest. I think but no, you're right. It's plotted very well. And the interesting thing about it is it, like, that formula that you say, like, it's such a tight formula that when we were talking earlier about that people criticize House for having such a tight formula, like, that's the formula. Like, I don't think that the pilot sets up the characters very well, because I think it sort of does it in a pretty heavy-handed way where House is, like, literally telling them, like, this is why I hired you. This is the character trope you are. And, like, which is fair, and, like, but the thing that it does really do well is it gets that formula right, because that formula never changes, like, at all throughout the entire show.
There are certain episodes where it does, but we won't go into those.
Yeah, but for the most part, like, but those are special episodes when you go, like, I mean, even when House is, like, you know, on the road or doing something, that formula's still there.
Yeah, it's
like, just somebody else has the epiphany. Somebody always has to have an epiphany.
Yeah, and it's what happens in between. It's the ways and the methods he uses to jump through the hoops to get to the end of the story, which are really interesting, and how he has to convince people, and he has to kind of cajole people, and he has to manipulate people into getting stuff done. And then on top of that, you got these little side skits. It's like, you know, when they have the commercial break in Seinfeld, and then they come back, and there's like a little stand-up bit, like, hey, what's the deal with Q-tips? Or something like that. Those clinic bits are like that.
Well, the clinic skits, like, is another, because the episode, you know, aside from introducing characters and Adler sitting in a bed going, oh, I'm going to die. Like, yeah, the clinic, I mean, the clinic skits are pretty damn good. Like, I don't think the clinic skits are ever bad. And for, like, 8 seasons of, oh, what funny thing can happen in the clinic next? That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like there are how many people are there in the first episode? There's the orange guy.
Obviously.
Who, as you said, like you couldn't tell he was orange because the show's orange, so it just looks like a man sitting around.
I thought like a heavily tanned man. So when I was looking at it from my iPad, maybe my eyes are a little bit more, worn out from years of television watching or something. I was looking, it's like, what is actually wrong with him? Did he just go to like Cuba? Why is House talking about his skin so much, or the affair? Well, he doesn't get to it until like the punchline.
Yeah,
but I was just like, this is really bizarre. And then obviously it dawned on me with the orange tints, like, he didn't just go on a nice holiday and was feeling a bit ill. He actually has orange skin. It's like, great.
because then there's the kid with asthma.
Yeah,
which is a pretty good, I think, like a pretty simple character moment of House telling someone they're stupid for ignoring medical advice. Pretty like good characterization, I think. And then the last one is that man who comes in like fibromyalgia. He says he's got fibromyalgia. He self-diagnosed himself. House takes the mickey out of people self-diagnosing themselves because he's like, that's ridiculous, which I'm sure is like the writing team being like, oh, what funny doctor tropes can we take the piss out of? And it's like, oh, well, people self-diagnose all the time because Google had just become a big thing, and it's like, ooh,
WebMD, man.
Exactly. So and then the third, and then that one, he gives the guy fake medication. He gives him just I don't know what they are. They're just mints or something.
Mints, a placebo effect he was trying to affect.
Yeah.
Well, he also skimmed some of that Vicodin.
He does, of course.
But there's kind of shady ethical behaviour there.
Yeah, I guess so. So for House, like, even though we like say that House is a pretty reserved guy in the first episode, he lies to people, he takes the piss out of people, he gives people false medication, which I'm pretty sure can get you struck off, and but then on top of that, we then have the big dramatic scene where the woman wants to die, which I think is still it's still one of the best scenes in House.
Really?
Which is I think it's one of those memorable scenes.
Yeah.
Which for the fact it's in the pilot. That's
pretty impressive for it from that view. I always saw it as, it's kind of affecting the trope of the like all patients do if they were in this difficult situation. It's like, you've treated me with all this stuff. You failed at every step. Now you're telling me this is the step that's going to cure me.
Yeah.
What reasons do I have to trust you?
But that's the point, is that House turns up at this step. Yeah. Like, because there's this running thing, and I think they kind of drop it in later episodes that House, like, he doesn't need to see the person, he needs the facts. Like, he's such a rational guy. He's such a clever, rational doctor that he just needs the facts. Like, he doesn't like the human side of the patient. Like, he just needs the numbers and the details. He can work it out. That's what House is about.
Just going into some like House criticism.
Yeah. That was like the cynic in me going, oh, actually, like, there's a lot of bullshit. But because I don't know, like, there's so many ideas in the first episode where they try and be like, let's make House never visit the patient, and
until it's a special one. And they
kind of drop that later on, which maybe it's not actually a bad idea. Maybe because that woman keeps saying, "Is that House? Are you Dr. House? Where's Dr. House?" Like but House in this scene, like, this is the big moment where he turns up and he's like, he doesn't really trust anyone to make this argument, because you need he sort of cuts through it. He stops like talking about the patient's like values and morals, and he's like, you don't want to die. It's not very nice. I'm a doctor. I've seen it. It sucks.
Well, he says you can't die with dignity.
Yeah.
You can only live with dignity.
Yeah, which is a nice line, like, not to bring too many like, personal feelings in, but I would say that's a pretty, if you've seen people, pop off, it's not the greatest show on earth.
Jesus Christ. Well, thanks for that little tidbit.
Yeah. No, don't die, Gareth.
Yeah.
Don't die, Gareth.
I will try not to.
Good. At least until we finish this.
Yeah. How long is that going to take? How many hundreds of episodes are there? I think it's like 178.
Shit. Well, we whack out 3 per episode.
177 or as close.
Fair enough. That's pretty good. Maybe you're like House. Maybe
God. What? But out by 1
yeah,
every time. So Oh, give them 10 milliliters of penicillin, and it's just too much, and they're dead.
Well, I'll be like, I only want to do 176 episodes, and you'll have to come and convince me. Like, there's no dignity in not finishing a House podcast 6 years after the fact.
There's only dignity in completion,
and I'll just break. So yeah, as you say with the ending, it's a nice sappy ending. All the children run in, they go, "Oh, the teacher."
And also, I mean, what's interesting is Chase provides the idea for solving the case, ultimately.
He does.
With the X-ray.
Yeah. Which is because as rendering my point earlier that the team don't do much, like Chase does step up, which I still think is Chase is like, wants to, they're trying to establish that Chase wants to be like House. He's coming up with the finishing move. Like the out of the because they often talk about how in the earlier episodes, especially this one, they're like House thinks outside the box, and I think Chase comes with that outside the box thing, being like he wants to be like House, the guy who comes up with those great ideas. Whereas for the moment, Foreman's playing it very straight. Like Foreman's trying to be like, I'm not going to be a puppet. Cameron, I don't think is very well.
I think you've got a thing against Cameron.
I know.
I think Cameron's like the scrappy one. She's willing to take risks. Something.
Not in this episode.
Oh no, but
no, I know. Overall, Cameron I think is really good. I think actually Cameron goes through some very she's clearly an extremely damaged person from what you see later on, and I think she she goes through a lot of stuff in that, and I think the actress, who I can't remember her name, but she's absolutely fantastic. But just in the pilot, at least, I think until that moment where Cameron's told oh, I only hired you because you're pretty, and then from there sort of she comes out of her shell and she's like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm more than that. I do think Cameron is a pretty. I think Cameron is a bit of a wet blanket, which I know is maybe that's her character arc. She is a bit of a wet blanket and she comes out of her shell. That might be it. But I do think that Cameron out of the team is the weakest one in this episode, which I think is a shame because, Cameron in the later episodes is absolutely fantastic. I just think that Cameron maybe is a hard character to establish.
Okay.
Which, you can establish Foreman by having him angrily eat a sandwich.
What?
But, if House says, I don't know why my American accent is so terrible. But, House is like, oh, you shouldn't eat that sandwich. And Foreman's like, I'm going to eat this sandwich.
Fuck you, I'm going to eat this sandwich.
You can sum up Foreman in, a simple action like that. But Cameron's, a bit more, Cameron's someone who's I tried really hard at school and, I care for all the patients. And she sort of has to go from there. And it's quite hard to establish that in an episode without the character feeling like a wet blanket, nothing.
I don't think
which she starts off as.
I think she's always in the office. She's always a little bit confrontational. There's a bit of that romantic edge. She obviously develops some sort of feelings. Spoiler alert.
She develops more than feelings.
I'm just going to keep it on the down low.
No, that's fair. No, you want to keep it chronological. That's fine.
But she's also, while she's being a bit scrappy, she overreaches a little bit, and she gets burned by House's searing wit and kind of obvious, intense set of emotions that House possesses. And then she's always kind of goes back a bit mouse-like, but she's always coming back in.
Yeah,
looking for a new angle.
I just think it takes a few episodes to establish that.
Yeah, I thought I got some of it in the first episode, but maybe I'm reading too far ahead and maybe projecting that back onto the pilot.
I think you are.
Yeah. And at the moment, looking at one of the kind of later scenes where Cuddy's speaking with the orange man.
Who still looks as orange.
Yeah, even though he's been cured, which is remarkable.
He's still orange.
And complaining. And you get that kind of, like you said, that police chief vibe. She has to make sure the patron, or in this case, the patient is like the commissioner in a way. And she's got to justify within a kind of hospital, he's a good kid. He's doing the best that he can.
Yeah,
House is a good kid.
But
I'm not saying general. I need to be more specific on that.
No, fair enough. But she's a really good. She's extremely charming, and just a really well acted character.
But I always
think
think but I think with Cuddy, as you could see, she kind of tires of having to kind of kiss everybody's ass. Like, it's like, and all these patrons and all these people that donate money. And she just wants to get into the medicine.
Yeah.
And get into the science and the administration of the hospital.
Well, that's a big thing that comes up later, which we'll discuss. But there is an idea that Cuddy might not want to really be the administrator. She's actually a doctor, and House takes the piss out of her for, being a doctor who isn't really a doctor. And I think, and then, another character, namely Vogler, pops in later.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. But he like sort of is the boss of Cuddy. And I think like he's a much more generic, I'm the boss, I'm going to be really tough on everyone, like hard balls, break some balls, all that stuff. Which, but yeah, which is a less interesting character. But for now, I think Cuddy like has that really good, like charming restraint, which really is what the pilot episode needs.
I just want to go back. We're also, just to let you know, we're also watching the episode and talking about it at the same time as we're allowing it on mute to see some of the visuals. And I just saw like an insane crash zoom into the guy with the fibromyalgia thing, and it's just ridiculously intense.
Yeah. Those camera shots, like 4 minute in sandwich, crash zoom on fibromyalgia guy through the window. This is when the guy comes back for more sugar pills, the guy we've mentioned in the clinic. Those never happen again. Like I know, like from episode 1 sets out the formula, but it does not do the visual style. Like no one continues with Bryan Singer's established visual style. The later seasons are much more restrained and professionally shot.
Oh my God, here we go.
Oh!
What a tonally incoherent shot to do.
And it's great because he's really well lit under orange hue. Like you can barely even see the man. It's literally like a crash zoom into the eyes of God. It doesn't make any sense. And then
he's a
lovely
really
little
looking person.
He's a crazy looking.
He looks a bit like Sam Hyde from Intelligent Extreme.
And then lovely zoom out from Princeton Plainsboro.
And it does
we see about 5,000 times during the episodes.
Of course, establishing shots are establishing shots.
Absolutely.
This is a disestablishing shot, I guess. But I don't even know if that's the correct technical term, but I'm using it.
Well, it's an establishing shot into the world of House, which is what the pilot is.
And also, the interesting thing about the conclusion of that episode is it uses a choral version of, or a choir version of You Can't Always Get What You Want, which has now got contemporary relevance because it's now used in almost all of Donald Trump's rallies.
Is it really?
Yeah, it is. Being an avid fan of watching, the most intense performance art ever known to man, that is something I can confirm.
Well, You Can't Always Get What You Want is becomes a bit of it's a bit of a theme in the series. It comes up a lot of times. It's definitely like an iconic. I didn't really remember it, but it seems to come up enough in the show that clearly someone thinks it's iconic. Like people often tie that song to the show.
Yeah, David Shaw really thought that one out.
He definitely did, because it turns up a lot, and we'll point it out as we see it in the coming years that it takes to finish this podcast. But yeah. So overall, I think pretty solid pilot. I think like for what a pilot is, in terms of House episodes, I think it's aside from a few really bad ones, which as we get to our worst House episodes, maybe when we get to it, we can point out our favorite or worst House episodes and do some top 10s. But for now, I would say probably one of the worst in the whole show, like across all the series. I just think it's it's a pilot.
Yeah,
it's what it is. It's a bit weird. It's got that House saying the phrase street smarts without a shred of irony, and it's pretty simple. And I think some characters are done well. I think Cuddy's established well. Foreman's established fine. I think Wilson and Cameron are a bit flat. They don't really come out of their shells for a few episodes. They sort of need a bit more background, a bit more background to their motives and why they're interesting, because they just come across as like goody two shoes people.
Yeah, I mean, they do come across as a bit try-hardy sometimes. But my review of the episode is a little bit different, which I think is a good thing. Obviously, you want disagreements in a podcast.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we'll just be, at the end of it, licking at each other's asses.
That's true. And
that's all you'll hear. Just... my assessment is that it sets up the simple narrative structure of what House is going to be, which is we're going to take the medical procedural genre and we're going to use that structure. It uses that kind of very straightforward A, B, C, D, E situation, diagnosis, interest is established. They come up with course of action, doesn't work, gets worse. They come up with another more extreme course of action. It may or may not work, but it seems to get worse, and it might be a red herring. Then there's another course of action that's the one they want. And I think on top of that straightforward structure, what it does is it has weaved into it these questions of profound skepticism, not only on the patient's side, but also on the doctor's side. So it kind of sets up a duality. So on one side, you've got the physicians who are kind of really racking their brains about a problem. You've got the example of that, which is House, who's looking for the truth wherever it may be at any cost. And what matters to him is getting it right. The patient, on the other hand, is just preoccupied with getting better.
Yeah.
And is or at least getting to a resolution where they're satisfied that nothing else needs to be done or can be done. And basically it's a fight between those two things in the pilot, which I find really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's the promise of the show thematically. And
the medicine versus the humanity.
Well, I think, the practitioner versus the patient. Or, maybe science or the insatiable thirst for truth that House has versus the insatiable thirst for wellness, or at least the ability to live. Whatever that means, if that means they want to die, and their own thinking is that if they can live as human beings, if they can die, which is a ridiculously deep philosophical question, which House destroys by saying there's no dying with dignity, there's only living with dignity. So that, I think the themes that David Shaw is able to kind of superimpose on that really straightforward structure gives it the promise it needs. The characters, I think we disagree on. Cameron, I think. I think she's a scrappy go-getter, even from the pilot. You don't think so?
Fair enough. No, that's fair. But I think Wilson is completely garbage in the first episode. I really do. I think Wilson is, I could say Wilson's one of my favorite characters. They're all great. Not the later doctors, maybe. Some of them are a bit lazy. I think they get a bit lazier.
There is nothing wrong with Taub. Taub is fantastic.
Taub's great. I'm not talking about Taub. I'm talking about do you remember the nervous one and oh no, you haven't watched season 8. Season 8 is where it's at. Season 8 is where it gets lazy.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I don't know, because I haven't seen season 8 in ages. I'm interested. Oh. Is it as lazy as I remember? But I just think thematically completely agree. I do think it sets up the, I would see it as humanity versus reason, or the medicine versus the human side. I think that's why she works with kids. Why Adler works with kids. I think seeing her surrounded by kids going, yay, and then House walking in a cane, taking some drugs, going, boo, I'm right.
Having watched the future episodes, I just wanted to kind of vomit when I saw that ending where it's Cameron said, oh, I've got a little surprise for you.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's 16 kids swamp into a medical ward. But it's why? Was it just to please the executive?
It must be to please an executive, because the house is never the house. The show is never like that again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to episode 2, Paternity.
Aye.
And
Well, let's start with the synopsis. A teenage boy is struck on the head in a lacrosse game and is found to have hallucinations and night terrors that are not due to concussion.
I assume you didn't write that yourself.
No, I didn't. It was from Wikipedia, of course.
Yeah, so I mean that's sort of basically what it's about, but more stuff happens.
Yeah.
So this is obviously after the pilot. So, but I would consider this to be a bit of a soft reboot of the pilot.
Yeah.
Personally, I will go into that if you want me to.
I
mean, do you agree? Do you disagree?
For starters, it hasn't got that orange taint.
It doesn't. Well, it actually has normal colours, which is very sweet. But yeah. So it starts off with a kid getting hit on the head. Fantastic, great opening. The one interesting point about this episode is how it starts with Now it does a few things, and I think this is my overarching why this is a soft reboot and why it's better than the pilot conspiracy. So I think it's important to note that the patient in this is actually, yet again, Wilson comes up to House and says, "Oh, you've got 3 qualified doctors and they're really bored and they're not doing anything." And we then see that the doctors are really bored and they're not doing anything, which is pretty much exactly the same situation that we had in the pilot. But what then happens is that the patient, Ian, and his parents come in and they're like, "We've got an appointment with Dr. House." And it then turns out that Dr. House hasn't actually invited them to see him, but instead Cameron, who's bored in the office, received a letter from them, and because she really cared deeply about her patients, wrote them back, forging House's signature. Now, I think immediately that sets out Cameron to be a caring person who is also a bit wily and is trying to prove herself. That would be my counterexample about why the pilot to House isn't a very good version of Cameron. She is very quiet, very mousy, and then he goes, "Oh, you're pretty," and she's like, "Oh no, I'm going to prove myself." So it kind of flows on from the sequel, from the pilot, into the second episode. But at the same time, I think the second episode also does a really good job in just establishing Cameron immediately as the character traits that it kind of wanted to do in the pilot, but it does it actually better by showing it's her initiative which brings the patient to them.
Okay.
And that would be amazing. And even the second episode kind of starts the same as well. Wilson is sitting in a room with House saying, "You need to take on a case." But Wilson isn't Wilson isn't lying to House or even involved really. He's just "Hey man, I'm your friend. You should sort of do some work." And it's actually the team who take a bit more initiative.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that they haven't really found a use for Wilson yet in the series, and they kind of still use him as a kind of Watson. Hey, there's a case kind of
yes, there's somewhere.
Yes. I'm nudging you towards this case that might be happening, but I have no clue about. You just have bored employees. But okay, so thanks. And I think David Shaw hasn't figured out really where Wilson is placed in the House universe, I guess.
Well, he becomes much more effective when House's habits become a bit more destructive. And then I think he becomes the way the team is the medical, buffer for House to bounce off. Then Wilson becomes more of the ethical one. And he kind of is in a sense in the first instance, because he's "It's unethical for you to have 3 doctors who are bored. I'm questioning your values, House." But it's pretty boring. But when House is sort of getting drunk, calling him up at night, just taking a shit ton of Vicodin and just really drug addicted, then when Wilson goes, "Hey man, maybe you shouldn't be such a drug addict. You should really sort your life out." That's more of an interesting rebuff than just him sort of moaning at House to do some work.
Yeah,
because that's kind of what Cuddy's job is. Wilson seems to moan at House to do cases. Cuddy moans at House to do clinic work, and then the team sort of moan at House to get the right diagnosis.
And the strange thing about Wilson is you don't know what his leverage is on House to do that. She said, "You're ethically bad," and he's like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And there's no real leverage yet. there's no real relationship.
Yeah, which we find out the leverage is that he's his only friend, but as you say, we don't know that yet.
Yeah,
he's just a bloke.
He's just a man who kind of pesters us like, "Hey, House, why are you in this examination room, doing nothing? Get to work." So if that was happening to me, I'd say, "It's none of your goddamn business." I'm gonna sit here and suck this lollipop and read this magazine. Fuck you. If you want to get me fired, go to management. So there's no real authority that's established. We also get in this second episode a better insight into what makes House take a case.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that, but you're right. Sorry, go on.
So, because there's the twitching that happens, and that's that one weird, small, well, not a small detail, but this one symptom, whereas all the other symptoms seem kind of really serious, but he treats them as if they're not. But then this one thing, he's just like, I'm hooked.
Well, that actually happens twice.
Yeah.
He hears about the night terrors. He's like, that's fascinating. He then resolves that, saying, oh, he got concussed. That's why the night terrors. Then he walks off, and then he sees the twitch again. And he's like, oh, that's actually interesting. So it establishes it twice. But yeah, because actually, like, that's how most cases start, is just House's interest in something. Instead of Wilson lying to him. I think they were trying for the whole Wilson is like his moral better man. He's like, you should do some medicine because you're a doctor. But in this one, this is actually like the kind of Rubik's Cube. Oh, I need to solve a puzzle, House.
Yeah. That kind of obsessive behaviour kicks in. And I think that adds an interesting dimension to the character that you don't see in the pilot. It's just cantankerous man solves problem with the teacher.
Because that one makes it seem like he doesn't want to work. But whereas House does want to work, he just wants to work when it interests him.
Just want to make a point. Yeah, I savagely reduced the pilot's plot. I could have equally have done the same for this episode as well.
Yeah.
Which makes the point that I made completely invalid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is, I'd say in the grand scheme of things, this is a pretty, like, solid episode of House. This is fine. It's down the line. I think that it's like a slightly better version of the pilot.
Yeah.
It is, I wouldn't say the medical case is any more complicated. But,
you say that, but in this one, there are 7 distinct stages of the diagnosis. So it is a little bit more complex than the teacher one, where it was really a series of complications.
Yeah. This
one has a few more diagnostic gears to the mechanism, I guess. That is the story. Consulting my information database, there are 7. He goes through the sexual abuse element, which obviously plays on the obviously very traumatic trope of sports people and sexual abuse, but also sexual abuse between parents on children as well, which is even more worse.
But he does it in that House way. By the way, just to confirm to everyone, Gaz isn't some sort of like savant genius and I'm some moron. Like, he has a laptop and I don't.
That's not true. This is all, you can say I'm stating rote facts, but I'm weaving them into a lovely, delicious narrative of analysis.
And I could have brought a laptop in here as well.
You could have, and you didn't.
I didn't.
You brought a knife to a gunfight. What do you expect?
That's true. I tried to belittle you, and I shouldn't have. Continue reading from the Wikipedia.
And you continue deciphering your handwriting in low light conditions.
Yeah, I have no idea what I've written here.
But... then you've got the concussion stage, which was the bit that kind of got me interested. Then there was the more dramatic degenerative disease with multiple. What was it? MS.
Yeah, they suspected MS.
And then hydrocephalus, which I think is water in the brain. I think just using basic word.
This is why I said we shouldn't focus on the medicine aspect.
No, the degenerative disease, the hydrocephalus, and then it's the multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
Then it's neurosyphilis. They just go way out into a sexually transmitted disease.
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes into the subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, which is basically he got measles and he went to the brain.
Yeah. But do you know why they come up with neurosyphilis?
Please tell me.
Well, as you might remember, that's actually the team that comes up with that.
Yes, it is.
Which is more on a point that the team are much more active in these episodes. Like they're not quite the quick fire team, but like there's a level of naivety here that's pretty nice. They're a naive team, but they very much still have ideas and they have something to offer, and I think that comes across more here.
Yeah.
Like neurosyphilis is Cameron's idea. Like she steps up and she says, "I have an idea."
Yeah, but she's wrong.
She is wrong, but that's like House even says that like very early on, that he prefers people that come up with ideas. Like when they're looking at his brain scan, he's asking them to look for things, and Chase makes something up completely, and House is like, he made something up, it was complete rubbish, but at least he tried. And then Chase actually does get the answer right by accident, which House respects more because yet again Chase is coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
But this is another one of my points about why I think this soft reboot does it better, and why I actually wish this had just been the pilot. Is because Chase is when they're doing that, when they're first looking at the brain scan, Chase is the one who's coming up with the ideas, he's trying to think outside the box. And I think that better emulates Chase's idea that he wants to be like House. He wants to emulate House in that sense. Like, and I think that in the same way that like then Cameron like forging that document in order to get the people in because she cares and is trying to prove herself. And then Foreman is obviously like not having any part of the games, like he actively questions House. I think that sort of sets up their characters much better than the way the pilot does.
Yeah.
And the team are just so much more active in the second episode. Like they're not just the astounded, like, oh my God, it's House and I'm a Watson split into 3 parts. Like they're much more active.
Yeah. They're more like individuals, right?
Yeah, they feel more like characters.
Yeah.
There's even bits where as you might have noticed, there's even bits where Chase and Foreman are actually with each other by themselves talking about Cameron, which is an interesting thing. Actually, Cameron's quite separate from the group, which continues for a few episodes, I've noticed.
That's not strictly true, because in this episode as well, Foreman and Cameron have a discussion, because Foreman comes in and kind of broaches the subject that when Cameron made those remarks about
No, that's episode 3.
Jesus Christ. They all kind of meld into one.
They do.
I apologise. Scratch that.
So, like, Cameron and, like, Chase and Foreman have a lot more scenes together.
Yeah.
Of them, like, chatting. It sort of feels like Cameron's a bit separate from the group, which, I mean, in a way, feels a bit disingenuous to leave Cameron out like that. But also, it's a bit, maybe it's realistic. Maybe, you know, Chase and Foreman, because they're just blokes.
They're lads.
They're lads. You know, they would, you know, sit around and talk about the attractive woman that they've seen in the office.
Yeah. And I think maybe that brings in a weird, you know, a kind of power dynamic that maybe future episodes David Shaw's going to explore.
Yeah, which
because
they definitely...
there is definitely a gendered power dynamic there at first.
Yeah. I mean, you can even see that with the way that like House makes casual sexual remarks to Cuddy, who is in charge.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely like a weird gender power play going on. I wouldn't want to say too much on it because I don't know what David Shaw actually wanted, but it's definitely there.
But again, I think he's trying to turn it on his head a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe he's trying to. I don't know if he really actually successfully does that in these first 2 episodes of the new fresh reboot that you call it. So in your timeline, this is episode 1.
From my end, this is episode 1. The pilot should not exist.
Okay. It's an aberration.
Yeah. But interestingly, first clinic scene, you got to have your clinic skits.
Yeah.
This one is a very satirical one. It's about anti-vaxxers. It's got a thing or two to say about anti-vaxxers, but at the same time, it also establishes a fact and gives the audience knowledge for later.
Yeah.
which is that after 6 months, mothers should get their kids vaccinated because the breast milk stops supplying baby
With antibodies.
with antibodies, which is quite, I think it does two things. And one, it's actually quite a cleverly written scene, and it also establishes something for later.
You also get a glimpse into House's hard-edged kind of rationalist,
Yeah.
very kind of, especially with the toys and that like example that he uses, a very kind of market. It's like, your anti-vax thing is as much a market-based like market as it is the non-anti-vax products. So don't kid yourself that you're being more real about this, or more woke, as we say these days.
Well, he's also I also think like that scene, because he's talking about her baby dying.
Yeah.
But in the earlier scene, he's also talking about, like, he's also says to the parents directly, like, oh, have you abused your son? Like, this is definitely a much less restrained House.
Yeah.
House is like, before, like, there was literally like, oh, like Adler in the first episode is like, oh, where's Dr. House? Who's Dr. House? Are you Dr. House? She doesn't know who Dr. House is. Like, he just sort of stays away. He's quite a restrained man. In this one, he's like talking to the patient. He's like, I actively hate you. I wish I wasn't here, but I have to talk to you. And then saying, did you abuse your son? Like, it's much more in your face, which, I think in later episodes, sometimes House is a bit too kooky and off the wall and maybe a bit too extreme. But like for these early episodes, I think like they really, like, second episode, they really start nailing like a really good balance on House. And like the second episode is actually a funny episode. Like I would consider House like a pretty funny comedy. Like each episode has it's got a lot of like good back and forth. It's got a lot of funny, like, I mean, literally the clinic scenes are just sketches. So I think like this scene actually establishes House as quite a funny character, because I don't think he's particularly funny in the first episode.
And also structurally speaking, you think, oh, the skits are kind of independent, and David Shaw goes, wait a minute, I'm coming in with a southpaw uppercut to wake you out of your kind of slumber, I guess, assuming that the skit wasn't really going to have anything to do with the plot. He comes in with a rope-a-dope, to use another boxing analogy, pretty laboured. And basically, I think that's good too, because it's just shown, even within the tight structure he's given, he can just play with the elements a little bit and just make people have to work only a little bit harder to get the plot. But yeah, you also get this idea of House is distant but not distant, if you get what I mean. The character does get in, and instead of being like who's House, where's House, are you House type thing, they go with House just comes in, says something that seems completely incoherent. Are you sexually abusing your children? Goodbye.
Yeah.
And then basically leaves after just interrogating them over this, what seems like a seemingly irrelevant point, and then recedes back. And then you do get it later in this episode, towards the end, where the parents come up to him and confront him about it. And it's because of his distance. So in that scene, he's sitting down at the bench with Wilson, having some dinner or lunch.
Some coffee.
Coffee, is it? Shit.
Dinner.
He's having some coffee with Wilson.
Yeah. Well, when the parents come up to him, they're like, "Oh, you're not looking after us," and he like rattles off numbers. But at the same time, like, it's not like he's some ethereal beast who's never stepped in the room. Like, the point is, he knows all the numbers, he knows all the information. He just doesn't want to interact with the patient, but he still met the patient. Like, I just don't think it's just like really heavy-handed. I'm glad that they dropped that, because I think that's a much better balance. They have like House is interested in the puzzle, not the patient. He's not like completely mental. Like, he can still turn up to the patient's room and talk to them. But because they actually like they do that in a scene where there's a scene where the patient goes missing from his bed because he's hallucinating, which, because he's hallucinating so vividly, makes them realize that it's not a degenerative disorder and therefore it's not a mess, which is one of the things that pushes them on to the next puzzle piece. But yeah, in this one, like, House is being called constantly. He can't, like, he wants to ignore the phone. You know, he's a fundamentally quite lazy man who doesn't really want to do any work. And then he eventually turns up, and Foreman's like, "Oh, we want to, like, help search for the patient." And House is like, "I can't help with these things. Like, only ask me, you know, when I'm needed."
Yeah.
So it kind of sets up a good dynamic of, like, Foreman and the team are for dealing with the patient. He's for solving it.
Aha.
And I think it does it in a much more subtle way than the pilot, where it's literally the patient. I know I've said this a million times, but the patient literally doesn't have a character other than going, "Are you Dr. House?" Like, she just says that like 5 times.
But he actually says, Foreman says, "So do you want me to call you when we need you?" And he says, "Call me when I can do something." That's what House is about.
Yeah.
If you need, only call me when I can actually do something to affect or change the treatment or the outcome. Don't call me when you think you need me, like you need a hug, or you need a pat on the back, or you need someone to say, "Well done, you did a good job."
Yeah. Well, he's all about results.
He's definitely about figuring out the problem, getting to the truth. Anything else is ephemeral. At least it seems that way, you know, or irrelevant. At least it seems that way now. But I think, as we'll see, hopefully in the arc for House as a character, that actually sometimes it's not necessarily about, you know, just doing something. It's about when you need it, like when he needs help, you know, rather than just, you know, someone coming along and saying, "I do help." What does that mean? It doesn't even make any syntactical sense.
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing thing with House that, like, he denies the emotional side because he thinks it's irrelevant. And a lot of the, I would say, repetitive character arcs, like, I would say that, you know, like, House sometimes feels like it's going over a bridge over and over and over again, like over a bumpy road. Just lots of arcs of the same thing, of, like, House gets the feeling that he needs to be more emotionally in touch with the world. Oh, he didn't do it. Which will go, because I actually think works for, like, the type of show it is. But, like, this definitely, as you say, sets up that whole emotional element, which is definitely explored possibly too much during the seasons. But I think that's more because there's just a lot of seasons and there's only so much you can do with House. Because if House is just completely happy and fine, then he's not House. He's not interesting.
Yeah. And I think his character is, if you think about it this way, he's always a doer. He wants to do something all the time. If he's not doing something, then he's in his apartment, maybe doing nothing and feeling sorry for himself.
Yeah.
So he's like a shark. He always has to keep moving to the next problem, or his ego and his personality will die. And I think one of the things that you find later on, with what I've already seen, spoiler alert, is that you get an interesting arc where it's about the fact that actually it's more than just doing stuff. He has to find a core to his personality that isn't dependent on just solving problems all the time, which I don't know if he solves or not. So I'm at a kind of big question mark with that.
Fantastic.
So don't tell me.
Well, no, that's why it's interesting to watch the show with someone who hasn't seen it before, because, like, you know, to me it's just you know, you actually get to see those things and can tell me if they're interesting or not, because for me, like, obviously I already know the plot, and, like, I think obviously I've seen it so much and, like, thought about it so much that there are bits that I just think, like, oh, that's so tired and hack in the grand scheme of things, but you can see it and be like, that's a genuinely interesting episode that I enjoyed in the moment. Whereas over the course of 8 years, I was waiting for each season and sometimes, like, over expecting things. So it's good that you can just watch it in a bulk and go, oh, that is as good as episode, like, that season 8 episode is as good as that season 3 episode. Whereas, like, I think inevitably if you watch something over a long period of time, you start to get nostalgia for the old episodes. So when you get to season 8, you're like, this isn't as good, even though it's completely adequate.
Yeah. On our little live clip that we're doing at the same time, Wilson and House having a conversation. Cuddy's there now. He makes a misogynistic remark. They have a conversation again. They still just don't know what they're doing with Wilson. He's just standing there. He's just dead meat.
Exactly,
in that shot.
I think you describing the scene just like perfectly sums that up. Like, just, how House and Cuddy have chemistry. Wilson is just standing there. Like, he is just the floppy haired, like, nice man. And, he, like, I think what the show, I don't know if Wilson, like, is a bit of, has the Trojan horse syndrome, which seems to, affect the rest of the series. But Wilson actually, when you, like, start exploring why he's such a nice person and how that niceness might be, like, a bit of a negative trait, sort of like, virtue theory, you can be nice, you can be not nice, or you can be too nice, which is like self-destructive. And I think Wilson has that too nice that it's self-destructive, which explains lots of things. It explains how he's friends with House. That destroys his life. It explains why he has so many divorces.
Okay, right. We're getting into so many details that we will get into.
But you need that extra element to Wilson. You need to know he's too nice. But for now, he is just a nice man who is just standing next to House.
And he just, every so often when House says something, he turns his head to House.
Yeah, and goes...
then he turns back. It's like looking at an NPC in a game.
It is. It's almost like an Oblivion character is like stood next to like House going, "You couldn't mean that. That's outrageous.
Get to work, House."
Yes.
I've treated mud crabs more fearsome than you.
But I think overall, not to, because like obviously we want to talk as much about each episode as possible, but I really think like a lot of what, I don't know if you agree, but a lot of my thoughts about the pilot are kind of here and they're sort of fixed. I just think like there's something about that pilot where the chemistry isn't there, like the performances aren't quite there, the color grading isn't quite there. And it just feels like, everyone's really naturalistic, everyone's bouncing off each other. Like it just feels like everyone's established better. Wilson not so much, but he'll get there. And I just think like the second episode is just a really tight, like just follow up to that. I think it's a good soft reboot of the pilot, and I think it really just does everything again much better. And it's not just the formula that's established this time. I also think like the character traits are here now. Like I think everything's really solidly established. And I think this second episode is, in the grand scheme of things, not a great episode, but I think it does everything so well that it's like a fantastic redo of the pilot.
Yeah. Just on a side note, there was also another clinic skit in that with the lawsuit. I think there was a little nudge from David Shaw. I mean, he was a lawyer. He knows his business.
He does. Well, there's lots of those skits that become a bit topical. Like there's malpractice, vaccination. Like there's a lot of those that creep in.
WebMD consults.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just wanted to bring that up. Obviously it's of interest to some people. Maybe they follow the skits. Maybe that's their favourite part. So I thought I'd just satisfy that. So they've gone through that little, he's got a wound on the leg. There's some pus coming out. House has figured out with deduction that this man's up to no good. Has a little bit of a chat. I guess you could call it a chat with Wilson, but really it's just House talking to a inanimate object.
And Wilson's going,
it's on a truck, so it's, he's just being trailed along. It's like, just keep that nice little foppish look going.
Absolutely.
And keep moving your neck every time it looks like House is about to say something. It's like,
and every time you see him, you're just like, is that the guy from Dead Poets Society? The thing I think, I mean, there's lots that happens in this episode. Like we could talk about like how House like deduces that the kid is adopted and how he handles that in a really unprofessional way, and it kind of again matches with House's general like, I would rather be right than emotionally sensitive.
He pushes the line. He pushes the boundary a little bit, and I think it introduces an aspect of his character that's always constantly testing the boundaries of what is acceptable.
Yeah, like
in his profession.
Yeah,
I mean, taking the cups from, two parents and also, firstly, he manipulated them into doing that by saying, "Oh, I'll take it for you," and was being nice. Now, I don't know if he was being genuine in his compassion that few moments when he said, "I'll go see a kid," or if he was just like, "Great, I found them. They're in a trap. Let's do this."
Well, that's what's quite good about the character, is he is quite hard to read.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's not a complete psychopath. He obviously has emotions, but he does use them to manipulate in a lot of ways. It's quite hard to like tell how much House actually cares. Oh, it's also one thing I do like about this is that you do see. I know this isn't true. I know that the residents don't actually do their own work like this, but you do see the people actually like running the tests, waiting around. Like you see House doing research. Like there's a sense of like, yeah, there's a sense that like everyone is like busy and intelligent, and they became intelligent for reasons. Yeah. If you see what I mean, like they have skills. It's not just like people are just walking into rooms and treating. Like in ER, you just like ER or all these other medical procedures. Like you never see them working. You just see them walking into rooms and like making diagnoses and stuff like that.
Then again, they do that, but I think they get the balance right. So I think there's a lot of the TV show is just people in a room trying to figure out why this person is sick, and then saying, "Okay, how do we go about doing that?" Now, you could easily have just kept it at that and not just done like a little tiny montage of them doing the tests.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would have been wrong. But you could have easily have had it where they're always in the laboratory doing something like CSI style, but for about 20 minutes, and House coming in there periodically. That would have been off.
That would have been terrible.
But they get the balance right where it's like, they're not just people trying to solve a Rubik's Cube problem. They're actually scientists, and they're trying their best to figure out a complex case. And I think David Shaw obviously gets that right.
Yeah.
Balance. Because sometimes it's a bit like a seminar room. You see like in a university or a college where they have like the acronyms, and they're trying to figure out what it is, and there's diagrams, and people are kind of waxing lyrical about what it could possibly be. And then that's interesting because you get a picture of not only the character but also the thought processes House has.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, and also the same with the others. And it's a good way to test out the characters and also their clashes in viewpoints.
Yeah.
Not just based in, "I don't like you," or, "Oh, you had an affair, I don't like you." It's like, I disagree with you fundamentally on this diagnosis, and that becomes the pivot point for character development.
Yeah.
In some cases, rather than just, you could easily have gone down the route of, generic one where it's all about personal issues all of the time.
Yeah. Well,
the diagnosis is personal to them.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what I think. That's what the pilot misses. It's the team doesn't, because they're new and they're trying to establish them as like new naive residents. They don't push back. Whereas in this, because they do differentials, they're like actually like the way they handle them is unique.
We're at the resolution stage on the video we're watching. Or stream.
Well, the thing I think, like, yeah, aside from just general chatting about the episode, like, it's not a bit. Oh, although the ending, right? So, no, so the ending is an interesting one, and I think the ending, because I do think just most of the episode is just improvements over the pilot. I think that's if you agree. I'm not sure if you do.
Yeah, I'm in two minds, because I did praise the pilot for establishing what I think is the mantra of the series, which is everybody lies. That we're very selective with the truth. And when someone comes along...
Which this does do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does it in such an overt way in the pilot that I was okay with that. Obviously, the smash the kind of crash zoom on the fibromyalgia person was a little bit spooky,
Yeah.
a bit tonally off, and the
orange sandwich.
sandwich. The sandwich scene was a little bit too intense for my liking.
Yeah.
I mean, usually that's reserved for commercials about food. I imagine Omar Epps had to practice diligently to make that work for Bryan Singer.
Well, the ending scene, I think, really, like, sort of, you see House with his cane, and it's kind of like, oh, that's just grumpy old House with his cane. And I think that the final scene, and you do learn more about House. You learn that he was quite an active guy, and you also learn a bit more about how he feels about his disability. But, like, he's very playful about his disability in the first 2 episodes. And I think that ending shot where, like, you confront, and I'm sure that he was picked as a lacrosse player for a reason, or like a sportsman for a reason, because you do just get that nice little ending where House is, like, confronting the fact that, he's, like, you don't really see him passionate about something unless it's for, curiosity. But in, like, that lacrosse, he's really passionate about that lacrosse game. Like, he clearly loves lacrosse. I don't know much about House at this point, but I'm like, if I was watching it fresh, I'd be like, hey, that guy loves lacrosse. And, like, that's the one time where you see him, like, genuinely passionate. Like, he's clearly left his house. He's gone to go and watch that lacrosse game. And then, like, but you clearly see, like, how much regret and loss he has over losing his leg. I mean, maybe he didn't need to. He hasn't
lost his leg. He's just limping.
That's true. But he's lost so much mobility, and you don't really see that at any other point. I think that scene really does it well. I mean, maybe we didn't need the staring into space with, like, everyone's left and House has just stood there for 4 hours. I don't know what he's thinking about.
It's just like the same. He's just nothing. He's thinking about nothing. He held, the stick like a lacrosse thing.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a bit much. But
maybe he loved sport that much, but he just lost the passion for it as soon as he had his infarction.
I don't think he lost a passion for it. I think he couldn't physically do it anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Whoops.
I think it's like, if you were like, if you were in a relationship and you broke up with them, I don't think that you, like, lose your passion for having regular sex. I think it's just taken away from you.
That's a very crude example.
It was a crude example, but it's like, I would say that, House isn't, he's had that snatched away from him. I think that's the power of that scene. But I think, so just to round off,
wrap it up.
We've only covered 2 episodes.
Indeed.
In this episode. But I think those 2 episodes were good ones to focus on because it's pretty much 2 versions of the pilot.
In your opinion?
In my opinion. That's I suppose so, but I consider the second one my favourite, unless you hadn't noticed that.
Yeah.
But I think, like, as a pair of episodes, they go together pretty well. I definitely think they are the pilot. That one is a reboot of the pilot. I might be wrong, but I think there's enough, like, reestablishing things there that I think it definitely rewrites a lot. I think if we'd have gone forward with the same House as in episode 1, I don't think that show would have been as popular as it was.
Yeah. Obviously the tone of the ending of the pilot was pretty terrible.
You really don't like that ending?
No, I just find it absolutely horrific.
Yeah, because that ending, what happened? House, like, stared into space, depressed.
Yeah,
that's how an ending should be.
That's a much more appropriate ending for House.
That's a House ending. Like, they've really got the tone right.
It really made me feel at home with House, seeing that second ending. But on the other hand, I think that I don't see it as a reboot. I see it as a compare and contrast. They refined the methods. David Shaw has obviously got the green light to do this season, and he wanted to run with it in a way that, was a little different from what Bryan Singer had put in initially. Because he does come back as a directorial, in a directorial, or what would you call it? In a directorial role.
Yeah.
Again.
And he fits the formula that House has then established in the second episode
Yeah.
more. He's not freewheeling with like, oh, let's make it brown.
He just expands like color palettes. It becomes like some sort of insane abstract expressionist on TV.
The first episode I colored after jaundice. I want to do the next one as heart disease.
Just red, blue. I mean, it depends on the kind of disease that's happening. If it's a lack of oxygen being transported through the heart, it'd be blue, surely, or a kind of purpley blue.
Cholera, brown.
Yeah, brown. Diarrhea, I guess, brown again. Maybe a different hue.
Internal bleeding, black.
Oh my god. Black Death. I mean, that's a fantastic one. You know,
Turns up.
Yersinia pestis is the name of the Black Death.
Wow.
Is the microorganism that's supposed to be responsible for the Black Death.
And Gaz didn't read that off Wikipedia. He just knew that.
Just know
I thought you told me you weren't a doctor.
that. Well,
well,
if I was to give my differential diagnosis on these two episodes, I would say it is like night and day, or like a heavily diseased patient and a cured one.
absolutely, yes. The second episode is very cured. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Differential Diagnosis, in which we looked at the first 2 episodes of House MD. We'll be back same time next week. You can join us, or you don't have to. The show's over. You can watch all the episodes and have your own thoughts about them. But anyway, thanks for listening, and it's goodbye from me, Harvey, and goodbye from Gaz.
Goodbye.
See you later.